Welcome to the Warriors Way podcast, a podcast about your rights, your freedoms, and the mindset to protect both. I'm your host, Mark Skoglund, president of CCW Solutions Group, and your host today. We help people in law enforcement agencies cut through the noise and carry and get concealed carry licenses done the right way. On November 5th, 2017, a gunman walked into the Sutherland Springs church in Texas and carried out one of the deadliest shootings in the state's history. And while most people would run from the sound of gunfire, one man did not. He ran towards that gunfire. Barefoot with a rifle in hand, Stephen Willeford, who we have here today, made the decision to confront evil and do it. And in doing so, he stopped an attack. So welcome, Stephen.
Thank you so much for having me on your podcast.
Of course, of course. And our co-host today is Jake Balemjian. He's a firearms trainer, owner of the Fireline Shooting Range in Clovis, California, and developer of the California Online CCW course, now serving more than 30 counties statewide. So it's because Jake is so knowledgeable and passionate about serving the community and the firearms industry that he has a seat here at the table today. So thank you for...
Thanks for having me.
So, Stephen, we're going to talk about your shooting. Can you just take us back to that day?
So on November 5th, 2017, and I don't believe in coincidences at all, I was on call. I was going to start an on-call. I worked as a plumber, maintenance plumber of a major metropolitan hospital in San Antonio, Texas, University Hospital. And 1 out of every 8 weeks, because we had 8 plumbers on staff, so 1 out of every 8 weeks, you had to carry a pager with you and carry it home and be on call, meaning that you would get a lot of calls late at night and stuff. So Monday morning was going to start my on-call, so I chose to stay home from work that day. No coincidences.
That's right.
To try to rest up. And so that day I stayed at home instead of going to church myself, which I normally went to church about 50 miles away from my home. And as I was at home relaxing in my bed, I could start hearing the gunfire. And I didn't think a lot of it at first. You know, your mind tries to make something normal out of something that's very abnormal. And my daughter came into the room, and she had been washing dishes and cleaning up around the house, and she said, "Dad, doesn't that sound like gunfire?" And right away, my mind went to, it sounded like someone tapping at my window. And so I walked over to the window, and I opened the curtain to look outside, and I didn't see anything. She said, "Come into the kitchen, it's louder." And when I was able to walk into the kitchen, I realized it was gunfire, and I told her so, and my daughter ran out and jumped in her Honda Fit and drove up the road to find out what was going on. I ran to my safe, and I called my wife on the phone, and I said, "Stay where you're at." She had gone that day because we weren't going to go to church. She had gone to my other daughter's house. We were building her home on our property. And she was pregnant with my very first grandchild. Mm-hmm. And so they were living with us also. Her and her husband were living with us also. And we were trying to finish their home before my first grandbaby was born, before their child was born, so that they could move into their home and be a family. And so my wife was taping and floating their walls. Mm. We built that home ourselves so that they wouldn't be in a bunch of debt when they're, you know. So my wife was over there with them taping and floating walls, and I called her and said, "Stay where you're at." And she said, "What's going on?" I said, "Someone's shooting up the church." And she said, "Don't go over there." I hung up the phone and dropped the phone. Later, she said, "I knew you were going." I grabbed an AR-15 out of the safe, opened up my safe, and I tell people, you know, if you have a choice, you know you're going into a gunfight, and you have a choice of a pistol or a rifle, always choose a rifle. I used to shoot on a church pistol safety team. We called ourselves the Sinners. And it wasn't always just pistols. Sometimes it was rifles. I built my own AR-15 for competition. So when the safe door swung open, I had multiple guns to choose from. I grabbed that AR-15. I grabbed a magazine and a handful of ammo and poking them in as I was running to the door. My daughter burst back in through the door and said, "Dad, there's a guy in black tactical gear shooting up the church." I said, "Did you call 911? She said, "I did. They're aware of it." So by the time that she drove up there, people inside the church had called 911. And in Sutherland Springs or Wilson County, 911 takes you straight to dispatch. We don't have big city or anything, so they were trying to get to someone, because someone inside the church had called them, made them aware of it, and then the phone went dead. And then my daughter called, and they said, "Yeah, we know," and hung up on her. And they were just doing that. They were just running through the gamut of, they wanted someone that was visual inside the church. So they told her, "We're aware of it," and hung up on her, and she came back to me. And I asked, "Did you call 911? She said they're aware of it. So that moment, I was actually more terrified of law enforcement than I was a shooter himself. But Sutherland Springs is so small. We're under 600 total population. And so far away in a really small county that I knew, well, large county as far as territory, but small as far as population. So I knew law enforcement takes a long time to come. So I chucked up the magazine, racked one home, and I started running across the street barefoot. People ask me, say, "Seriously, you didn't put shoes on?" I said, "You're lucky I had pants on."
That's right.
Because I kept hearing the shots, and I knew each one of those shots was meant for somebody I cared about. I'm fourth generation on the same property in Sutherland Springs. And so as I ran out my door, my daughter followed me. And I told her, "Go back in the house and load me another magazine." I knew she couldn't load a magazine and come running across the street with a magazine in the middle of a gunfight, but I didn't want her following me over there because I cared so much about her. That crazy man had too many targets that I cared about. I didn't need her following me and being a distraction. And I certainly didn't need her to see me fail. If I would have lost that gunfight, she would have run to my side, and he would have murdered her next. So she went back in the house, and I ran across. And as I was running across the street, and I can't tell you other than I truly believe that God called a demon out at that moment, because halfway across the street, I yelled out. I was about 50 yards at that point to the front doors of the church, and I yelled out. And inside the church, he had just shot Julie Workman through the breast under a pew. She was hiding under a pew. And he shot her through the breast, through the pew. And then he bounced one off the concrete into her leg. And then he turned the rifle and shot through the pew in front of her, where her son, Chris Workman, was in the pew, under the pew in front of her, instantly paralyzing Chris from the waist down. And then, as he did every time before, he slung the rifle, pulled the pistol up, and he was pointing it at Chris. And that's what he'd do. He'd wound them with a rifle, and then he would finish them with a pistol. And Chris said, "I was looking down the barrel of the rifle when I heard you yell." And Chris said he's startled when you yelled.
What did you yell?
What's that?
What did you yell?
Are you ready for something deep and philosophical?
Please.
I yelled, "Hey."
Nice. Distraction, right?
I truly believe that the Holy Spirit called out a demon. Because the moment he startled, he dropped his rifle in the church and came out of the church building shooting at me with a pistol. And when he came out, he was wearing Class 3A body armor and a ballistic bulletproof helmet. And he started flinging rounds at me. I ran behind a Dodge pickup. That's not cowardice, that's just good sense.
Sure, of course.
Something about a 6.4 liter V8 Hemi that was really comforting at a moment. And he hit the Dodge pickup in front of me, shattered the windshield of the Dodge car behind me, hit the house behind me. And I put my first shot in his left chest. I hit him in the abdomen, both stopped by the body armor. And that persuaded him to want to leave. And he started running for his vehicle, which was sitting in the middle of the street with the driver's side door open and the engine running. And when he turned to his side, I was able to put one high in his side between the plates and one high in his legs. And he still got in the vehicle, slammed the door, and he put 2 rounds through the side window. And honestly, I saw the glass open up and falling in slow motion. And I busted one across his forehead. And right underneath the rim of the helmet, across the forehead, he accelerated his vehicle, turned the corner. At that point, he was fleeing. By the time I got in the middle of the street, he was 150 yards away and leaving. And I put one through the back windshield, went through the driver's side seat, and it hit him right at the left shoulder blade. And he topped the hill out of sight. And I'm standing in the middle of the street thinking, it can't end like this. It can't end like this. He's getting away. And I looked off to my left, and there was another Dodge pickup at the stop sign. And I had never met this guy before in my life. His name is Johnny Langendorf. And I ran over and I tapped on the window and said, that guy just shot up the Baptist church and we have to stop him. Every sane person in this world would have just jammed on the gas and left me standing there. But this is Texas we're talking about. We're not known for sanity.
Sure.
A little sense of duty and honor. The next thing I heard were the locks come open. I climbed up in the cab of a truck, and God gave me another gift with Johnny. Johnny's a cartoon of Texas. Johnny had a big white Western hat on with a feather sticking out of it. Toothpick hanging out of his mouth.
He's a good old boy.
He's got a longhorn skull tattooed in the middle of his neck, and the horns run up underneath Johnny's ears. And he never said a word to me. He was on the phone. I figured out real quick he was actually on the phone with dispatch because he had eyes on the guy. And so dispatch was there with him. And he didn't say a word to me. I climbed up in the cab, and he took off after the murderer. And we sped down the road doing well over 95 miles per hour, splitting cars and stuff. And I dropped my magazine because I didn't know how many rounds I had. I just grabbed a handful. I didn't know how many rounds I had fired because you don't count them.
Yep. Right.
And so I believe God said, check your magazine. I dropped the magazine. I got one in the top of the magazine, one in the chamber. And I looked, and I didn't know his name. I said, tell them, hurry, hurry. I had 2 rounds left, and he still got on body armor. I never wanted to see red and blue lights more in my life. Never, ever, ever disrespect law enforcement that's coming to put their life on the line for you, and they don't even know your name. However, with that said, law enforcement is second responders. You are your own first responder. Nobody's coming to save you. And we're blasting down the road, chasing him. And finally, we got within sight of him again. Johnny was giving them a report on the phone every time he'd go past a crossroads. And at first, we didn't even know if we were still chasing him or not. We couldn't see him. but and Johnny giving him where he was and stuff, and we came over the top of the hill and around a curve, and I said, that's him. That's it. A gray SUV. It was a Ford Escape. The back windshield was shot out. My last shot went through the back windshield, through the driver's side seat, hit him right at the left shoulder blade. And I said, that's him. And I turned and looked at him. And I said, you know, if you catch him, you're going to have to put him off the road. The very first words Johnny said to me is, yep, I already figured that. He's probably thinking I always wanted to try a pit maneuver. But as we came up to him, he pulled off in the ditch on the side of the road. He knew he was being chased at that point. And Johnny pulled up with his front bumper, even with the guy's rear bumper, still on the road, and stopped. And he had a sign in front of him. It was a curved sign indicating a curve ahead. And I thought, he didn't even leave himself a way out. You know, he's like 2 foot from the sign in front of him, and he stopped in the ditch. And as soon as Johnny pulled up, I put the passenger side window down and shoved the rifle out, and with my left hand I opened up the door, and I was going to push out the door open. I was going to step out and use the door as a shield and re-engage him. But before my foot hit the pavement, he accelerated. He took the sign out, went back up on the road, and about 3/4 of a mile around the curve. And this time he swerved hard off to the left. He went through a fence and about 50 yards out into a field. And Johnny pulled up on the road behind him and stopped the truck. And I told Johnny, I said, just stay down below the dash. You know, stay out of the gunfire. And I got out of the truck and put my rifle over the hood of a second truck. And Johnny got out, pulled out his phone, and started live streaming to Facebook. He did whatever millennials world would
goodness.
do. He was live streaming to Facebook. And it took police, their own estimates, between 5 to 7 minutes before they showed up. And at one point when Johnny was filming me, I even yelled out, "Where are the police?"
It seemed like an eternity, didn't it?
You know, they say it's 5 to 7 minutes. It felt like forever.
Oh, for sure.
I'm sitting there, and the vehicle's facing away from me at just sort of, and I can't see inside the vehicle. And I had an EOTech on it, and I got that EOTech trained on that driver's side door and yelling rude obscenities, and I think God will forgive me. I was saying, I wasn't real choosy about my words at that point, but I was really angry. And 5 to 7 minutes, and then I heard off to the left, I heard, "Driver, get out of your vehicle with your hands up." And I turned and I looked up the street, and about another 50 yards up the highway was a police officer. And he was standing out behind his door with a microphone in his left hand and a pistol in his right hand, and he keyed the mic again and said, "Driver, get out of the vehicle with your hands up." And I tell people, at that moment, if you ever have to be involved in something like this, that officer may not know who you are. You want to make sure no bad decisions happen. I laid my rifle on the hood of Johnny's truck. I put my hands up as high as I could get them, my fingers wide open, and I'm walking back to the back of the truck. And that officer made eye contact with me, and he keyed the mic again. He said, "Not you." He showed me more respect in that moment than I ever expected. But I didn't know he knew who I was.
Yeah.
And that man wants to go home to his family. And one of the tragic things is I realized later, I found out that there was another officer that was in the car with him. He told her, stay in the car, don't even get out. It was her second day being a law enforcement officer. And I just found out recently she works for a department one county over from Wilson County, and I would love to have a conversation with her because that could be a career-ending thing.
Absolutely.
You know, the second day you're an officer and now you're faced with a mass murder.
It's crazy. That's so. Did he end up getting out of the
finish
truck?
the story.
Yeah, finish the
Finish
story.
the story.
You left us hanging with the officer.
Well,
Get out of the truck.
To me, and I leave that out sometimes, not meaning to, because it's not as important. But what the police say is, in the end, he turned the pistol up underneath his helmet and pulled the trigger and ended it himself. And I'm cool with that. I don't care. Yeah. I think any hunter knows I hit him between the plates and the side. He was not having a good day.
You know, you had said something earlier because we had a conversation beforehand, and I'm going to let you reiterate that. You said courage is what?
So I now have had so many opportunities to speak with law enforcement agencies and other people that are involved in these things. One of the things, the officer in Nashville, Tennessee, that stopped the Christian school shooter. And if you've ever seen the video, it's an amazing video. That team worked, and I was on a panel with him, and we were behind in the green room talking about it. And I came up to him. I said, man, I really, really appreciate you. I said, I have a theory now, and it's courage is contagious, and so is cowardice.
Yes.
And I said, be that man or woman even that refuses to back down, that stands and runs in, no matter how scared you are. And honestly, I was terrified, but my feet were moving. Courage is contagious, and other people will follow that. But in Uvalde, it also showed that cowardice is contagious also.
Yeah.
When they refused to go in and they went down the hallway, and then shots were fired and they scampered back and left that door. Courage is contagious, but so is cowardice. Stand up. Be the man that refuses to back down, that runs into the gunfire, and other people will feed from your courage.
Absolutely. It is contagious. I agree. Was there any hesitation once your daughter said there's a man, you know, in black Kevlar? You just didn't hesitate. You started running and probably didn't even know you were running towards the gunfight.
You know, it's crazy because I remember when the first Iraqi war happened, and they were talking to soldiers, and one of the soldiers said, I never thought I would run into gunfire. And I thought to myself, wow, that's something really strange to think of, is running into gunfire. And I remember thinking at that time, wow, what would it take to get someone to run into gunfire?
You found out.
And I found out.
Yeah.
And honestly, when something like this happens, you find out a whole lot about yourself that day. I used to teach self-defense courses with firearms.
Okay.
As a young man. I had certifications and stuff and would teach self-defense courses. And people would always ask me, how do you know you would do the right thing at the moment? And I would always be real honest. And I would always say, you don't know. I can't tell you. But I will tell you, if you've never thought about it, you probably won't.
That's actually very important. One of the things that he probably goes through in a lot of these courses that he teaches is
Absolutely.
the mindset.
So we talk, when a lot of people talk about muscle memory when we talk about shooting. I'm sure you're familiar with that as well. Holster drawing, those kinds of things. And it's about building pathways between your body and your brain. Neurological pathways. And I'm not a scientist. I don't know what the scientific explanation is for it, but I know that if you practice things, whether they're physical or mental, you think about them, you run these scenarios through your mind. What would I do? When your brain flips into that fight or flight mode, you will do the things that you've played out in your mind before. And it's important that those things be accurate. You need to get good training so that you have those correct pathways, but those things happen instinctively. Instead of having to think about them, you just do them.
Yeah, so I've written a book, and in my book it talks about one of those conversations that happened with a man I used to work with, and I knew he was like a 5-degree black belt, and Art knew that I used to compete and I used to shoot and I used to train and stuff like that, and Art asked me one time. He says, or he told me, I guess. He says, if something really happened, you'd probably crap your pants and run. And I said, that may be, Art. It may be. I can't tell you. I said, but I know you're a black belt. And what do you do when you go from one belt to the next belt in training? You go out there and prove your proficiency of these moves on that floor. And you're not fighting somebody, you're just proving your proficiency. You're training your brain. And you're training your subconscious so when somebody throws a punch at you, you don't have to think, he's throwing a punch at me. Right. I need to swat it away. Okay, because if your brain has to work on that, it's already made contact.
You already got hit.
Before you react
Absolutely.
properly.
Yep.
And that's why you train these moves over and over and over and over again, is because your subconscious takes over at that point and you do the correct thing at that moment. He said, you're right. I said, I can tell you if you train your brain nothing, you'll do exactly that when the emergency comes.
Absolutely. He was just talking about muscle memory, working on that mental memory as well, even if you're not,
just the pathway, those thought pathways.
It's like, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to do. That way you don't have to think about that. So,
and it's funny. I truly believe that God wires some people different than others.
Absolutely.
I used to, and still do, but used to when my kids were growing up, I'd go into a restaurant and I'd call it the gunfighter seat. I'd always sit with my back against the wall, looking out over everything. And it got to be a big joke with my kids. And when we'd walk into a restaurant, the first thing they'd do is run over there and sit in the gunfighter seat, knowing that I was going to throw them out of that seat. Yep. And they'd say, Dad, you're just, I was here first. Well, that's my seat. Get out of my seat. I don't care. There's 2 rules when I sit in a restaurant or sit anywhere. 2 rules. Number 1 rule, always got my back against the wall. I'm in a chair, not a booth, if I can manage it. Always have my back against the wall so I can see everything. Second rule is, my wife sits on one side of me. You can sit on either side of me, but my wife is on one side of me. And that's because I made you guys with her. I can make another one.
Yeah, right. It's funny. Well, when we're trying to train our kids, though, so at what point do you allow them to say, you have my back today? Because you train kids in the way that they'll go, right? I know it's really hard, but I remember training my son. He's 14. I'm like, hey, tell me about the room. Let's talk about these things. And he'll tell me about the room. And okay, so you're building these skills up in them, but never do you want to give up your back. But you always have people. I'm very close with our sheriff and a couple people in our department, and I have to trust them at times to be like, okay, you've got my back.
Yeah. So I'm traveling to California today.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So it was real funny when I had dinner that they were the ones with their back against the wall because I'm unarmed. I can't carry in California.
Well,
But you can.
so actually, I want to actually bring that point up. So Jake actually, because he does the California Online CCW, Riverside County, and even we're here in Solano County, you can get a non-resident CCW, so you can carry while you're here.
Yeah, I can get a non-resident, but then I have to comply to California's rules on which guns and whatever. My gun's
Actually,
probably
that's actually only partially true. So
I can't have my 15-round magazines, can I?
you can't bring them here. That is true.
So
That is true.
So there you go. I just came from the gathering.
Is it better to have something than nothing?
That's
though?
right.
I came from the gathering and I had to find somebody to send my 30-round magazines back to Texas with, so I didn't have to fly with
Right.
them here.
Yeah.
You know, my AR-15 upper and my 30-round magazines, I couldn't take them on the airplane and come here.
No.
There is that.
Yeah, we're fortunate. That's a relatively new thing that started last year in May.
Well, I would love to say I work for Gun Owners of America. We are now fighting for national reciprocity.
Yes.
And with national reciprocity, what we're fighting for is if I'm from Texas, wherever I go in the United States, I have to follow Texas law with me, and California can't enforce their laws on me because I'm from Texas.
Yeah, I think the purpose behind the non-resident that we have here, and I'll just give you, like, as an example that you used, you come in here, but I always tell people because there's a ton of shipping that comes out of California. People come here and they drive up and down the coast, and they might be from another state, but does your Second Amendment, like your driver's license, transfer from state to state? Of course it does. So that's why California, as screwed up as they are, has implemented a non-resident option.
And that's fine, except I travel all over the nation with Gun Owners of America. Please, you find us at gunowners.org.
Yeah. Shameless plug, but
A
yes,
plug,
please.
a big plug
I got
here.
you, yeah.
But if I had to get a non-resident license with every state,
Well, so there's reciprocity. I think we can get you up to 42,
About 40.
40
Yeah, you can get a
states.
California non-resident permit. That'll get you a whole bunch of other states. And you can also get an Arizona non-resident or a Florida non-resident. You can get coverage in just about all the states you'd want to go to. Yeah. How's that?
So actually, I kind of want to circle back on the incident. When he was coming out of the church and he saw you, like, what was his reaction?
he started shooting at me.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Were you able to, like, I know you said you were like 50 yards away?
well, when I yelled, I was 50 yards away. When he came out of the doors of the church and started flinging rounds at me, I was 20 yards away.
Okay.
Wow, that's really close.
Yeah.
And he started flinging, and I was running and shooting, and I hit him 6 out of 6 rounds, by the way.
Nice.
I didn't miss one shot. And I ran for a truck as fast as I could. I needed, because didn't have any kind of armor or anything. But yeah, he was flinging rounds at me at about 20 yards. And I tell people, you see this much fat running, brother? There's something serious going down. There ain't nothing like fun run with me and my age.
I get it.
It doesn't happen anymore. Something serious is going down if you see me running.
Right.
And this is another good point. When you practice, you should practice with a purpose. And if you think that standing in one spot, shooting at a flat target is practice, that's actually marksmanship.
Yep.
And marksmanship isn't going to get you very far in a real world situation. With our church pistol team, again, we called ourselves the Sinners. We competed week to week, and there was no telling from one week to the other what they were going to do with us.
Sure.
So one week we walked out and there was a plastic baby doll sitting on the table. There was a box of diapers there. And I was like, oh, what do they got going for us today?
Sure.
And, they stepped up. Today's course of fire, when the whistle blows, you will pick up the baby doll. You will take the diaper off, wipe the baby doll's butt, grab a diaper the baby doll, shoulder it on your weak arm, and then engage the targets walking through. And if you stop to take a shot, 5 seconds will be added to your time.
My gosh.
At the end of it, switch the baby doll to this side, rechamber your pistol on the side of the table, and engage the targets, weak hand only, shielding baby doll away from, and so that was the course of fire. And then another week, we walked out, and it's like, oh God, there's a box of earplugs there and a welding hood on the table. Today's course of fire, low light training.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
With tunnel vision, because you're looking through
The welding mask.
the welding mask, and you got earplugs. Now you can see your hands, you can see the pistol, you can't see the sights. And you can't see the targets unless you're turning your head and looking both ways.
That's interesting.
But that was some of the scenarios from week to week. We never knew what we were facing. And again, you were talking about mindset and stuff, and talking about how you build those, and where I thought of a lot of scenarios. Never thought I would be running to a church.
Right.
And engaging a shooter while moving and shooting. And honestly, all that saved my life that day, and other people's lives too.
Absolutely. I know Jake, being at the firing line, one of the things that he talks about is continuing education, continuing training. And we worked with a ton of vendors as well we're not trying to make tacticians, but we want people to be gunfighters if they're ever called to be, right?
One of the things that I find interesting, and I actually use this when I teach CCW classes, is I always ask people, do you always have car insurance? When you're driving your car, do you always have car insurance? And people say, of course, always. I said, you don't just call your insurance agent when you're going to go on a road trip, or you think you're going to go to a bad part of town and maybe your car might get broken into. Oh, of course not. I pay for my insurance every month because I never know what's going to happen. That's exactly what being armed is. It is a form of insurance. And one of the biggest things that we see is people, I ask our customers all the time, like, hey, are you carrying regularly? Oh, well, it's this excuse or that excuse. And I tell people, I carry a gun with me everywhere that it is lawful for me to carry a gun. Everywhere. And
Even some places that are not lawful.
And why do I do that? Because
I'm not encouraging anybody to break any laws. However, I did hear Ted Nugent say it best one time. He said, when I walk into a gun-free zone, it ceases to be a gun-free zone. There's at least one gun there.
Right.
But the point is that you never know when you're going to need it. So I want to have it. And there's another cliche saying.
I believe in gun control. 100%.
Yeah.
If there's a gun around, I want to be in control of it. I believe in gun control.
Yeah.
I want to be in control of that gun, and it's just, and I think there should be. Man, here I am in California saying these things. I think there should be a law. So I believe in private property rights. And I believe if you put up the sign to prevent me from going into your property legally, and I go into that property and I get shot because I cannot defend myself, you should be financially liable for that.
Wait a minute, say that.
One more.
Yeah, I don't.
You have the right to tell me I can't come into your establishment
Correct.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
armed.
Yes.
However, you have taken my ability of defending
I
myself
follow you
sure.
now. Yes.
away.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if you take my ability to defend myself, you should be responsible for my well-being when I'm on your property.
I agree.
I agree.
I agree with that. Yeah.
I own property, and I'm the king of my property, and I should be able to tell you you can't come on, with a black shirt on, right, if I desire, because it's my property, and I think that's stupid, but okay. So I think the same works. You know, if you tell me, first off, I'm not going to do business with you.
Well, that's my stance, is that if I see that sign, that's my signal that I need to go somewhere
If at
else.
all possible, I won't do business with you.
Yep.
And if for some reason you got a metal detector and I can't walk past your door without you knowing that I got a gun and I have to be in there, then you should be liable for my safety, because a criminal does not care about your metal detectors, about anything else, and proof is in the pudding with the school shootings and church shootings and things like that. Gun-free zones do not work. They disarm law-abiding citizens. 97% of all mass shootings happen in gun-free zones.
You know, there's a school district, and I know it's in Texas. I just can't say where. I don't know where it is, but I saw some advertisements that there are signs that says the staff here is armed.
Well, actually, we have
The teachers are armed.
we have schools that are Marshall program and Guardian programs. They are programs that will instruct teachers and faculty. And there's a big one, bigger than my car, sitting out in front of Lavernia, which is the school closest to where I live. And it says teachers and faculty at Lavernia ISD are carrying guns and will use everything to our ability to protect our students.
I'm a big advocate for that.
And not one time has one of those schools been attacked. Uvalde had the choice, and they chose not to take part of the. We can't force people to do
No, of course not.
No, and we shouldn't.
but it should be allowed. In Uvalde, one of the teachers that died in Uvalde was a wife of a deputy. And if she would have had the Guardian program or the school marshal program, likely she would have been one of the ones carrying. And she died. She called her husband after she had been shot and she was bleeding. And they stopped him from going in.
Jeez.
They stopped him, and she called him on the phone and said, "I'm dying, I've been shot." And she was
horrific.
unable to defend her family or her kids. And she died in that, and they wouldn't even let him go in. They stopped him. I honestly, you couldn't have stopped me. You would have had to shoot me in the back.
Sure.
As I am, and I'll do that for your kids or your wife, because I did.
Sure.
But you put my wife in there, Satan himself is not stopping me.
Yeah, I like it. I like it. Huh. Yeah, that's good. That's good.
So why did he choose that church? Was there any?
Again, he came to Sutherland Springs the week before was Fall Festival, which would be Halloween or whatever you want to call it. They call it
the
Fall
harvest.
Festival. They the kids dress up and they give out candy and stuff, and it was a big party and stuff. He came to Fall Festival the week before and said he hated Christians and started yelling and screaming and using F-bombs and other bad language and stuff, and just absolutely, they came up and said, "You need to leave." Now, his wife's mother and father and his wife's brother also went to that church.
Did this gentleman go? Or this?
They weren't
Salem,
there
did he go-
that day, but his wife's grandmother was, and he murdered her.
Really?
But he said he wanted to kill as many Christians as he could.
Wow.
Yeah. When did you find out, like, the totality? Because I know that you had left, obviously, to chase him down. At what point did it, like, hit you, and then you found out that there was actually 26 killed and 21
Well, so at the crash scene, and police held me there for 4.5 hours. And they didn't go right away down to they didn't go confront. They waited for a drone to get there, and they flew a drone over to look in and see what was going on, which is good sense.
Yeah.
Sure, they got time.
And if he was bleeding to death, so what?
Right.
So he was crashed out in the field, and they kept me. So they brought me back when I finally got back to the police line. They set me down on a guardrail, and it was really funny because I could look up the road. They had a roadblock 200 yards away from me, and I could see my wife's car up there. And no one did I want to speak to more than my wife. And I still didn't know the totality of anything, and I wanted to tell my wife I was okay and stuff. And a police officer walked by and said, "Excuse me, can I call my wife?" He said, "Yeah, go ahead." And he kept walking. I said, No, can I use your phone? I don't have a phone. He said, "You don't have a phone?" I said,
I don't even have shoes.
"I don't have shoes on." And so he hands me the phone, and I called my wife, and I said, "I need shoes." I said, "I'm okay." And she said, I can see you moving around." I said, "I'm okay." And she said, "Are you really?" And I said, "Well, I'm uninjured." And we had a moment there, and I asked the officer, I said, "Can I go back and get my wife's shoes?" And he says, "No, you need to stay here." And I said, "But my feet are hot." That day it was 90 degrees. Oh, wow. And the pavement was starting to cook my feet. Sure. I said, "My feet are hot." And he opened up the back of his squad car. He says, "You can sit back in the back." And I said, "No, I'm cool." Those doors don't open from the inside.
No,
It's like, I figured I was going to be arrested, but I didn't want to make that easy.
Right.
I didn't want to make it just like, "What? Oh, we got him now." But after they finally let me go, and they did at the scene, they finally, after the Texas Rangers got there, and I should have kept my mouth shut and said, "Look, I'm not giving any statements or anything else," but honestly, I got diarrhea of the mouth.
That's normal.
And it shouldn't be. I mean, when a law enforcement officer gets in a situation like that, they give him, 48
At least 24
or 78,
at least 24
Right.
72 hours.
At least 24
Yeah.
hours.
They give them time to process before but no, they hopped me from police department. I gave statements to 5 separate law enforcement agencies. And there's reasons that I should have kept my mouth shut.
Can I ask you a question? So you said you gave statements to 5 different agencies. How consistent was your statement across all 5 of those statements?
My statement was really consistent. However, and here's the trick, they were trying to convince me that when he came out of the church, he had a rifle, because everybody said he had a rifle. And when I said he came out shooting at me with a pistol, they were like, "You sure you want to stand on that? Everybody else said he had a rifle." I remember a pistol really clearly. Well, everybody was saying it was a rifle. Yeah. And by the 5th one, I was beginning to question myself. Mm. And I didn't want to screw this up,
Right.
Sure.
but I was beginning to question what I saw and everything, because everybody said he had a rifle. Well, he did have a rifle.
Did. That wasn't inaccurate.
But he dropped it in the church and came out shooting at me with a pistol, and everybody's saying rifle, 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 and 3 different sheriffs, ATF, and Texas Rangers, and they all seem to have the same story.
Right.
And it wasn't jiving with what I was saying. And so now I'm panicking, and that's why you should keep your mouth shut. Because they almost convinced me that he had a rifle. Now, I stuck to my guns, nudge, nudge, wink, wink.
Right.
I stuck to my guns because I remember distinctly as he's turning, seeing the double-stacked magazine in the Glock. It was a Glock. And I remember seeing that distinctly, and again, I saw him pointing at me. I saw the slide, the muzzle flash, I saw the slide and the brass roll out, but by the time it was done, I was starting to think, maybe I was wrong.
Yeah.
Because adrenaline does a really strange thing, and it clouds your memory. And that's why they give 72 hours to law enforcement, so he can process everything. And they didn't give me time to work things out. However, the story that the church gave, the people, the neighbors, and the story that I gave were close enough they knew that I wasn't the problem. And this was Texas we're talking about. It's not California or New York or New Jersey or one of the other states. Yeah. They were actually at the scene calling me a hero. And to go to your question, when they finally released me from all that, 4.5 hours later, I was walking that 200 yards up to my wife's car, and one last person behind me said, "Mr. Willeford, I need to speak with you for a minute." And I turned around, and it was a very pleasant-looking lady. Her mascara was running real bad. She had been crying. And I turned around, and she said, "I had friends in that church." And I said, "How bad is it?" And she said, "It's really bad." I said, "Who?" She said, "We don't know yet." I said, "How many?" She said, "We're not even sure about that, but it is very bad." And she said, "But if there's anything I can do for you, here's my card. I'm the DA of Wilson County."
Oh, nice.
Oh, that card came out of her fingers so fast, it was probably smoking, brother. But, and that's the difference between Texas and other places. I truly believe that the last shot that I took with him fleeing down the road, and he was fleeing, some states would have said that was an unnecessary shot. Texas said he's still a danger.
Yeah.
He still has guns. He's still going to have a shootout with someone. He's still a danger, and that was a justified shot.
So, yeah, I spent 20 years in law enforcement, and I know our district attorney would probably say the same thing, that he's still a threat, because if you let him go, and I commend you for your courage for continuing that pursuit.
Well,
but
another man asked me, he said, "I understand when you stopped him shooting up the church, but you got in the vehicle and chased him.
Absolutely.
Why'd you chase him?" It really pissed me off.
Well, yeah, but he was still a threat, because if
Exactly. And I knew he was going to, at very least, have shootout with the police department.
Right.
I already had him on the run.
Yeah.
Was it a wise thing to get in Johnny's truck and chase him down the road? You got to figure that out for yourself.
Yeah.
But when he realized he was being chased, what did he do? He turned the pistol on himself and ended it.
Yeah.
And I'm good with that.
Absolutely. I know you said you had a moment with your wife. The aftermath of it, when you probably went home and truly understood like the impact of what had happened and your impact on that situation. Tell us about that. Like, I would think that, because I haven't been in that situation, but hearing other people talk, it's like it's an emotional dump.
And as a Christian, my mindset really surprised me when I think about this. When I finally got back to the car with my wife, I sat down in the seat, and she said, "How are you?" I said, "I'm okay." And she said, "Are you really?" I said, "Well, it hurts." I said, "I think I killed a man." And she says, "You did what you had to do." I said, "But it hurts." And she said what I needed to hear. She said, "You did what you had to do, and I'm proud of you." I didn't care what the rest of the world thought of me. I really didn't. But what my wife, I've been married now for 37 years. What my wife thought of me was everything. And to hear, "I'm proud of you." And I told her, I said, I think I killed a man today. And whether I did or not, I was responsible for him dying, okay? The police say he killed himself. And at the time, I didn't even know that, you know. But I was responsible for a man dying. And where my mind as a Christian went was really strange. Because I told my wife, I said, you know, I learned as a young Christian that when Solomon asked God for wisdom, he didn't ask for riches or anything else. He asked God for wisdom. Because he prayed for wisdom and not riches, God made him wise. And I said, I heard that and I thought, wow, if I just pray for wisdom, God will grant that, because I'm not asking for riches or power or wealth or anything else. I just want God's wisdom. And so as a young man, I made it a habit of praying for wisdom. I said, I wanted to be Solomon in my life. And now I feel like David. I said, God prevented David from building his temple because David was known as God's warrior king. Yeah. And he had blood on his hands. And I said, I never wanted to be David. I wanted to be Solomon. I wanted people to know me for my wisdom and not my battlefield strengths. And then I figured out that God gave my wife Solomon's wisdom. He granted me that wisdom, but not myself. He gave it to my wife. Because she looked at me and she said, just remember that God called David a man after his own heart. He said, if God wants you to be David in this life, why would you settle with being Solomon? Be who God chose you to be.
That's interesting, you know, but recognizing that, because I know we had spoke about you being raised in the church, but we often push back on God. Like, that's not what I want. He's like, that's okay. This is what I want for you. And my wife's going to be like, I get emotional too when I talk about these things.
Well, when I talk about my wife, we've been married 37 years. And my parents were killed by a drunk driver. Who was there when that happened? My wife. My wife was there by my side. My wife is everything. Every moment of disaster, she's been there. Every moment of happiness, she's been there. And every moment that I've needed support, my wife has been there. And it's really funny because the state of Texas, our lieutenant governor came after the shooting and said, we're going to treat you like a law enforcement agent, a law enforcement officer in a shooting. They said, we're going to require you to take 2 to 3 weeks off work with pay. And we're going to require you to go to post-shooting counseling. And the first thing I said is, I don't work for the state. You know, I work for University Hospital in San Antonio, and Dan Patrick said, my next stop is going to University Hospital. And he says, we're going to have a talk with the CEO of the hospital. And he said, I think you'll see it our way. And even if Texas has to pay for your wages, you're going to take a couple of weeks off. And you're going to go to the post-shooting training. And I walked in, and it was a post-shooting counselor for the Texas Rangers. And she looked at me and she said, this is going to be different. She said, I've never counseled someone that wasn't an officer. And I said, that's okay, because I've never counseled with anybody before. So you know, we're both kind of, you know, but she said, Mr. Willeford, your life has changed today. nothing's going to be the same.
Yeah, that's actually kind of where I kind of wanted to go from there. Like, what has changed in your life since that moment? I know
She
you've been
told me
speaking.
she told me, she said, your life is, you're going to have to get used to a new normal. I told her, I said, I really like my old normal.
Right.
And she said, well, that went away.
Yeah.
I said, then what's my new normal supposed to look like? And she said, that depends on you. And I said, that's not what I wanted to hear. You know, and somebody give me answers.
Yes, right.
And she said, well, we find out that those that believe in something greater than themselves and have a supportive family usually work out better. I got this.
Yes.
I've got faith. And that's the only reason I could do what I did, is because I got faith. And I have a family that will back me. And yeah, my life has changed. It's I no longer work as a
plumber.
maintenance plumber.
Yeah.
Now I'm a national spokesperson for Gun Owners of America.
Just turn it up. Yep.
National spokesperson for Gun Owners of America. I travel all over the country. I've met with the president twice already. I was called to the Arctic Circle to speak with Native Alaskans. I got a knock at the door, answered the door, and this lady standing at the door, and she said, hi, my name is Brenda Krim. She says, I'm a missionary in the Arctic Circle to Native Alaskans. And she said, since I'm a woman, they're a very male-dominated culture, and I'm able to reach the women, but not the men. And she said, they heard your story in the Arctic Circle.
Wow.
And they brought her in to talk to her about it, and said that what they believed in their culture, what they honored the most, was a man that would risk his life for his tribe.
Yeah.
And they said, that man risked his life for his tribe, and we hear he's a Christian. Bring him here, and we'll speak with him. Where I was able to go to the Arctic Circle to speak with Native Alaskans and talk about Christ.
Interesting. Wow.
Where's my life going? I've got a book, a town called Sutherland Springs. I got a book. And
We're gonna list it on our channel. So
What's that?
we're gonna list it. I think I told you how many people have seen this. So we're gonna put your book on our stuff so people can support you.
Cool. So I'm now a published author.
Congratulations.
Who would have thought a little old plumber from Sutherland Springs, Texas?
And real honest, so a lot of authors like myself get ghostwriters that write articles, write a book and stuff, and they wanted me to have a ghostwriter, and I told them I sent my, again, no coincidences, I sent my daughter to Texas A&M, where she had a 4.0 GPA, to be a creative writer.
Oh, nice.
And when they offered me a ghostwriter, I said, I can't do that. My daughter's a writer. And they said, is she any good? I said, well, I may be a little biased,
right.
you know. However, I think she's great. And they got us on a call, and they said, you lied to us. She's not great. She's magnificent.
Oh, fantastic.
And so she's now co-writer of my book.
Okay.
And so how's my life changed? It's changed in so many ways. I travel all over the country. I do things like this, and in the CCW conference, I speak before law enforcement officers all over. I fight at state capitals for your rights, and
It was a gift.
Yes. Actually, a gift to everyone else, to all of us.
It's amazing, and if I had to write a resume for all the way from plumbing and med gas and OSHA certifications and everything else, and then now I'm listing public speaker and book author, and
But think about it. Your experience is able to touch so many people and give them insight. I mean, when you talk to a group of law enforcement officers, the number of people that have experienced what you've experienced, you could probably count on a couple of hands. It's not a lot. And so all the hypothetical training in the world it's not as good as what you experienced. You have that real world, real time experience with this. Well, and I'm sure you're not happy that you have it, and I don't mean to, I'm not trying to glorify it. But,
I understand.
But that information is priceless. It is literally priceless.
And I've realized, I know a lot of people now that train. I know some trainers for alert, and for all you non-law enforcement officers don't know what alert is, it's a national active shooter training for all law enforcement. It's actually in San Marcos, Texas, not too horribly far from where I am. And I know a lot of the trainers from alert, and I talk to them. I know a lot of people, and the trainers from alert, they're just valuable, and they've picked my brain more than once. How can we instill this in law enforcement? And y'all will hear a little bit about what I believe tomorrow at the conference, because I am speaking with mainly law enforcement tomorrow. Sure. And if you'll allow me, I'll maybe talk a little bit about what I tell law enforcement.
Sure, of course.
Okay, what I tell law enforcement is, if you want to think about something like this happening, you need to understand, you need to look at it as what's not here today now, what your tomorrow might look like. Because there's no guarantees in life. So what's your tomorrow look like? Something happens today, what does tomorrow look like? Your tomorrow may be 6 of your uniformed friends with white gloves carrying a box with you in it, putting it over a grave, folding a flag, handing it to a family member, and doing a 21 gun salute. And even in that, did you deserve that honor? Because there's no guarantees. Your tomorrow could look like Scott Peterson's tomorrow. For those that don't know, Scott Peterson was a school resource officer in Parkland that hid behind a column while 7 more students died after he was hiding around the column. They tried to prosecute him for that, and I honestly do not believe that cowardice should be illegal. However, what his tomorrow, his today looks like, is I guarantee you he hears the whispers behind his back. His nickname, I've heard several times, is the Coward of Broward. Does he deserve that? I don't know. But does he think he does? Probably does.
What does he think about? I mean,
when he shaves,
he knows what he did.
When he shaves his face in the morning, what does he think about the man looking back at him in the mirror?
Only he can answer that.
I can't prosecute the guy. If I sat on his jury, I couldn't find him guilty of anything, because I know the terror that he went through. I understand it, and I don't think that that's illegal. However, your tomorrow could look like his today. Or your tomorrow could look like my today. And I didn't ask for any of it. But what happens today? If my family and I go out to dinner in Wilson County, Texas, the county that I'm from, it's a roll of the dice whether I get to pay for my own meal. I didn't ask for that.
Right.
However, I'll go into a restaurant, and when I'll ask the waitress, where's my ticket? Somebody in the restaurant paid for your meal. Who? They didn't want you to know. They just want you to know that they know who you are, and thank you. I didn't ask for that. That's not why I did it for. However, my son worked a late shift, a shutdown. He's a plumber like I was. He worked a shutdown at a company, and they shut down all the water and stuff late at night, and he worked till 2 o'clock in the morning to get the water up and running and stuff. And he said, Dad, I was coming home from work. And he said, I was tired. I was bone tired. And he said, I was breaking the speed limit, and I know I was. And I said, I know I was. And he said, and when the red and blue lights came on behind me, I knew I was caught. He said, I knew they had me. And I was guilty, and I pulled over. And he said, by the time the officer walked to my door, I had my license out, sticking out the window. I looked at the officer, and I said, here's my license. My insurance is in the glove box. And he said, I opened the glove box, and I started digging for my insurance. He said, out of the corner of my eye, he said, I saw the officer pop a light on my license. And he said, Willeford, huh? My son said, yes, sir. He said, Sutherland Springs. My son said, yes, sir. He said, do you know Stephen Willeford? My son said, that's my dad. He said, the next thing happened, I saw a uniformed hand come in with my license in front of my face. He said, you tell your father Lavernia PD has his back. Please slow down and have a good evening. My son said, I don't know if I could get a ticket in Wilson County or not. I said, don't try it, son.
Right.
Don't push it.
But your son is so proud of you.
But
And your wife is, your whole family is proud
the
of you.
legacy
Yes.
is all that's left when you die. You and me and everybody else are going to die someday.
Yeah.
And when I die, I believe in Jesus and his promise that he gave me. And I believe I'm going to stand before my God. And I don't want him to say, why didn't you do what I asked you to do when I asked you to do it? Mm-hmm. I want to hear, well done, good and faithful servant. That's all I desire.
Yeah. That word you just said, legacy. So my colleague that's here with me, his father-in-law passed away about 3 months ago, I guess about 6 months ago. And I went to his memorial service, and the pastor at their church was talking about legacy. So his father-in-law, Gary, was a great guy, great man. And he left behind an incredible legacy. And you're 1,000% correct. That is absolutely the word that should be in the back of every person's mind is, what am I leaving behind? Am I leaving this world with my head held high, knowing that I did what I was supposed to do? I did what I was called upon to do when I was called upon to do it. And you did that. That other officer that chose to do nothing has to look at that face every day that he shaves, every day that he wakes up, and know that he did not do what he was called to do. And I personally, I don't want to judge anyone else, but I don't think I could live with myself knowing that. I would choose your today 10,000 times over versus his today.
I tease and say maybe I got a little Klingon blood in me. Death before dishonor.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Because I'm going to die anyway.
Exactly.
Right.
Someday I'm going to, and that's not what I fear. I can't fear death because it's inevitable.
Right.
None of us get out of it.
Yeah. Well, fantastic.
That's
Well, I think,
awesome
I think legacy is where we should end this. I really, really appreciate you being here, kind of telling our story, or your story, I'm sorry, telling us. But
I feel kind of useless sitting here.
No,
your story is absolutely amazing. And I'm
Yeah.
honored that I was able to hear it in person.
Yeah.
Thank you guys
so
for
much.
allowing me.
Yeah. Thank you, Jake, for being here. So.
Yeah, this is moving.
It brought me to tears for a second. I'm a weller. So, but again, thank you. And keep following us on the Warriors Way podcast. CCW Solutions Group, we're sponsoring this podcast today. And again, thank you, Jake, from the firing line.
Yep.
There you go. And California Online CCW for being here.